We are 3 weeks away from the start of the VCT Americas 2025 season, and it's time to look at every single team and choose one player as each team's best. Which player out of each 5-man roster is the one that shines the brightest and will take their team to glory? That is what we are here to answer today. So this is the board we have today. We have every single Americas team on the board. We will be starting from the bottom right, which means that we are going to be starting with Furia, and the player that I've chosen for their best player is one of their new additions in Heat. Now, some fans of Furia might be saying MW Zera, but MW Zera had just a really bad season last year, and he has had a good offseason. Furia has actually looked pretty decent in the one offseason tournament that they played, but Heat looked really good in that tournament as well and had a very good year for himself on crew. After getting kicked off the MIBR roster in 2023, Heat had a very good bounce back for himself on crew, playing on a non-Brazilian team, and it was kind of surprising when crew decided to drop him, and he finds his way back to a team that is from his hometown country. I'm not really expecting Furia to be good. I know that they won that invitational tournament in the offseason so far, beating MIBR, which is a team that I would consider to be better than them, but they still have a lot to prove, and if they're going to get anywhere, Heat should be one of the front runners to make that happen. Moving on, we have the newest team in the VCT Americas, and that is 2Game Esports, and the player that I've decided to go with was Silence. Silence had a very good Americas Ascension tournament, being one of the best players on that 2Game Esports roster that upset M80, and surprised everybody by being able to get to the spot, showing that Brazilian Tier 2 is definitely alive and well. And maybe I would put Spike as the best player on the team if he was allowed to play. He is too young to play at this time. But Silence is a very interesting player. He plays a Sentinel duelist flex role, which is a bit more of a different kind of flex role that I've seen from players. Usually it's like you play Initiator and Smoke, or maybe Initiator and Duelist, but seeing a Sentinel duelist is quite interesting to me. And that style of play makes Silence a very valuable player. He's been good for them in the offseason event that they have played in so far. And with Spike out of the lineup, it opens the opportunity for Silence to really show what he can do on the international stage. He might be the main duelist player, at least that is what they've been doing in the offseason. He's proven he's capable, and we'll see if he can make a name for himself, and I'm definitely expecting him to. I'm not sure how this 2-game roster is going to do overall, but they showed that they are absolutely capable of upsetting teams. And just because they're the newest team doesn't mean they're going to be the worst team. So we will see what happens for them from here. Moving on, we have crew. And I think it's pretty easy to choose which player is the best one on the team, and that would be the long-standing member of Kesnet. Crew and Leviatan have this funny, consistent thing between the two teams where a lot of players that play for one team end up playing for the other. It does make a lot of sense. They are the two only Latin American teams, but it is funny to kind of look back and say that Kesnet was briefly a member of Leviatan. Kesnet started his tenure with Crew all the way back in 2021 at the inception of the VCT, and he has proven time and time again that he is a very talented duelist player. I think the main thing that I would say against him is that he does struggle with being a bit inconsistent. He'll have games where he looks like the best player in the entire world, rivaling the likes of Ospos and Tens of the past. And then he'll have games where he puts up like 6 kills and 20 deaths, 3 assists, like just insane numbers that are just not what you expect from him on a good day. So that is definitely one knock against him, but he's still supremely talented. He's one of the best Latin American players. Maybe I could have put Mazzino as the best player on crew, but I'm kind of skeptical of Mazzino as a very good player. I know Mazzino's a good player, but his time on Leviatan was, I think, a career year. I'm not sure how he's going to do coming back to crew. He did play for crew in the past as well. We'll see if Mazzino can replicate what he did on Leviatan, looking like potentially their best player at times, even over Ospos. So that's very impressive. I think crew, I'm a little bit worried about the roster overall, but on paper, they at least have a decent one. We'll see what Kesnet can do. And if Kesnet is consistent, if he can consistently play at a high level, then crew should be in a pretty good spot. Moving on, we have Evil Geniuses. Now, I was hoping that their full roster would be revealed by now, but technically it's not. They did tweet today that Nature, Superman, and Derek are returning, things that we already knew. But also the rumor is that they're bringing the newcomers in Ye and Icy. Ye playing for them in an off-season event, the Sen City Classic. But nothing is 100% confirmed yet. Maybe that changes by the time this is uploaded. I am expecting Evil Geniuses to announce this very soon. But I do think that their new addition in Icy has the potential to be this team's best player. I could have put Ye down and make an argument for that, but what I will say about Ye is I don't want any pressure on this guy. I just want this guy to get his confidence back. I'm not going to set my expectations high for Ye right now. He still needs to prove himself. I think he had a good offseason with Sin City Classic with Evil Geniuses. He looks a lot better than what he did on both Bleed and DSG. So he could absolutely be their best player, but I'm very confident in Icy. Icy gets booted off the G2 roster at the end of last year. G2 opting to go with Jogamo instead of continuing with Icy, and I don't think that that's a huge knock on Icy. He just wasn't the superstar duelist that G2, a team that really wants to win a VCT tournament, needs to have. But he is still a very good player. He struggled with consistency issues early in his time in G2, but he got a lot better as the year went along. So did the rest of that team. Obviously, his champs performance wasn't perfect, but G2 did not have a good tournament overall. But Icy has the potential to really refine his game and prove that he can be a superstar duelist in this league, given the right opportunity. And Evil Geniuses, playing under Potter, might be that perfect opportunity for him. I'm really confident in Icy. I think this guy's going to be a good player for a while. I just think it's going to take a little bit of time, but I think on Evil Geniuses, we can really see him thrive. Moving on, we have Loud. Now, when we look at Loud's roster, we see that they have 2 new additions in Digizin and Vinny, and they kept 3 players from last year's roster in Kawazin, Tui's, and Pankata. Now, this team lost arguably their 2 best players in the offseason in Sadak and Les. I'm not going to give it to any of the new additions yet. We haven't seen too much from them, but Loud in the offseason in the one event that they've played did not look very good. I know some people got mad at me in my America's Expectations video saying that I was just saying that South American and Brazilian tier 2 talent is bad and that North American talent's way better, which is just not what I said. Simply put, I just think that when it comes to the Brazil teams and even the Latin American teams, we haven't always seen that consistent super high level play, especially last year. Leviatan barely counts as a Latam team anymore. They only have 1 Chilean player and Crew. They did have that fun run at champs, and I do have a lot of confidence in Crew as a team. But when it comes to the Brazilian teams, Brazil had their worst year last year. Like, none of the Brazil teams in Americas were good. Like, none of them. Loud had their worst year yet, and MIBR and Furia were always around the bottom of the standings, just never being a very good team. So me setting my expectations low for some of these Brazilian teams, aside from MIBR, who I do have a lot of faith in, it's mainly based off of how the Tier 1 talent has done, actually, how the past Tier 1 talent had performed last year, and hopefully these new Tier 2 players that are coming up from these Brazilian leagues and coming up from Ascension, like 2Game, hopefully they do well. I want to see them thrive, especially seeing 2Game upset arguably the best North American Tier 2 team in M80. So I do have a decent amount of faith in Brazilian talent overall, but when you've seen at the Tier 1 level that it seems to be stagnating a bit, that is definitely concerning to me. Anyways, getting off that tangent, just wanted to mention that briefly. Maybe I go into it deeper in a different video, but for Loud, I didn't want to choose these players that are coming up from Tier 2. I know Digizin was previously on Furia in 2023, but I would not say that he is their best player. So in my opinion, it's between the 3 players that were on the roster last year, and I decided to go with Pankata. You could definitely make the argument for Tui's or Kawazin, but for me, Pankata, especially with how much time he missed last year and then came into this Loud roster late, he showed that he still has that ability despite missing a lot of time. He performed decent at the offseason event that Loud played in, and I think overall he's a very consistent player. He's mechanically gifted. He can play a good support role. If Loud's new roster is going to thrive and get back to at least close to what they were before, then I think that Pankata would be the main driver of that. We'll see how he does. Maybe this changes and maybe one of the new additions ends up being that new best player. Moving on, we have 100 Thieves. Now, 100 Thieves didn't make a lot of changes in the offseason, only swapping out Bank for Xander, which was more a decision of Bank. They wanted to keep the rest of their roster, but he did decide to go to Sentinels. And them keeping the same roster, I'm torn on it because while they did have points of the year that they looked really good, like winning stage 1 and then getting to top 4 at Shanghai, they also had a lot of pretty bad losses even at that Shanghai tournament and in their own region where they could not make their way to champions despite having a, at least on paper, pretty easy road there. So I am very curious to see what this mostly run back roster ends up doing, but I do think that Cryo was their best player last year and is their best player still. I could have put EU down here, but I really like Cryo's play. I think he is a very talented player. After having a disappointing 2023, I thought he bounced back very well on 100 Thieves in 2024, proving why 100 Thieves picked him up in the first place. And I'm glad he did end up staying on 100 Thieves. I want to see what he can do more with this roster. Mainly being a smokes and duelist flex player, I think he has rounded out his game very impressively, and I'm excited to see what he does. If 100 Thieves are going to make it back to an international this year and make some good noise there, Cryo should be the one popping off. Moving on, we have G2. Now for G2, I did decide to go with their new addition, only making one change in the offseason by swapping out Icy for Jawgemo. Now, the main concern with G2 picking up Jawgemo is that G2 plays a style of Valorant that is a lot different to what Jawgemo is kind of used for. They're a lot slower, they're more disciplined, and Jawgemo is just go, 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 aggression, aggression, I'm in your face, ah! But I don't think that that being his playstyle necessarily means that he's bad for G2's playstyle or that he wouldn't fit in with that system. What I do think it does is it allows G2 to be more adaptable, to be able to play these different styles instead of only that slow, disciplined style. We saw last year that that style worked and that it got them to a very far point in international tournaments, but it didn't win them any tournaments. And now I think with Jawgemo coming in, they have a superstar player now. Jawgemo absolutely is one. There's a reason why this guy has been touted as one of the best players in Valorant for the past 2 years now. I've been praising G2 picking up Jawgemo all offseason. I think it's one of, if not the best move in the offseason, and immediately puts G2 from one of the better Americas teams to potentially the best one. This man makes this team very dangerous. They have a very deep core now, and I think this team is going to do great things in 2025, and Jawgemo is going to help them get there. Moving on, we have Leviatan. Now, they went through some pretty drastic changes in the offseason. They did just lose 2 players, but those 2 players were arguably their best 2 players in 2024 in Ospos and Mazzino. So you lose that smokes initiator flex player in Mazzino, and you lose the best duelist player, or one of the best duelist players in the world, in Ospos. But I do think that during last year, with those 2 players performing as well as they did, it kind of overshadowed one other player that I think doesn't get talked about enough. And that player is Kane. Kane is honestly a fantastic player. If you look at his stats, you would not know that this guy was an IGL. I don't necessarily think he's the best IGL in the world or that he's like the best caller or whatever, but as an individual performer, this man is cracked. This man is very good at what he does. He was playing controller last year while being the IGL, and he really just fit into that role. He's able to put up the skills. He's able to have really good stats while being one of the better callers. Again, I don't know if he's like top 5 in the world or whatever, but he is a very solid caller. There's a reason why Leviatan got as far as they did last season. It wasn't just Ospos, it wasn't just Mazzino. You have to have your overall team be performing to a elite level, and Kane, I think, was, and I think did definitely get overshadowed by a lot of people. So I think if Leviatan, with the drastic changes that they've had in bringing in Demon 1 and a tank, if this team is going to replicate what they did last season and go far at Champions, Kane is going to have to not only find the individual performances within his teammates by being the leader and put up the same kind of numbers that he did last year. Very curious to see where this Leviatan squad goes. Their leader in Kane, I do think, is their best player. Moving on, we have Energy. Now, this one's kind of an interesting one because they kept 3 players from last season that came in into stage 2 in bringing back FNS and SOM, and they kept Ethan for this year's roster as well. And Energy have looked like the best team in the offseason, I would say, winning the Sen City Classic with only about 2 weeks of practice, and then going to Korea for the Soup League tournament and winning that one as well. Yeah, they got upset by Lo-Fi, doesn't matter. FNS teams seem to always lose to a random Asian team at the beginning of every tournament. It's just kind of like a rite of passage. But they've looked incredible, so who is the most valuable player there? Well, I decided to go with one of their new additions, and I really think that Verno is just gonna destroy the VCT this year. His numbers in the offseason have been absolutely fantastic, mainly playing Initiator and a little bit of Sentinel with Cypher, mainly playing the Info Initiator role with Sova, and it's worked to a T for this new version of Energy. And him coming over from the tier 2 team in Oxygen Esports, a team that looked really good but just ended up just not getting where people thought they would. Him coming to this team with his previous coach in Bonkar seems to be working to a T. They have a really good leadership system. system at Energy. You have the new coach in Bonkar. FNS is FNS. He's one of the best IGLs in the history of Valorant. So this kid is learning from some of the best in the game. You have just some really good vibes going on right now. You got some great personalities there in Som, and you have Ethan as well to learn from, a very tenured esports player. So this Energy team is dangerous, and I definitely think that Verno so far has shown that he's the best player on that roster. Maybe Som or Mata ends up taking that title, but I think for now, this is a pick that I'm pretty comfortable with. Moving on, we have C9, a team that just put together their official roster for the 2025 season after making 2 changes in 3 weeks. So after kicking out Rossi and Moose, they bring in Mitch, and now Net is what has been announced today. So on paper, the roster's okay. I guess I'll talk about them in a different video, but I think easily their best player is, to no one's surprise, Oxy. Oxy showed last year that he absolutely is one of the best up-and-coming players in Valorant. He looked great at kickoff, and then he had statistically one of the best Stage 2 performances in the entire Americas region, even beating out Ospos in some of those important statistical categories, so he showed just a lot of really good promise. His Stage 2 was not to the same level, but C9 started to do what they always do and start to slump after a mid-season run where they look really good, and then of course flame out in the playoffs as well. So the only reason why I really want C9 at Internationals, because at this point I just can't root for this org, but what I will say is I really want to see Oxy at an international tournament, preferably in a different jersey with a different roster, but if they get there, I will be cheering on Oxy. He's an incredible talent in Valorant right now. Really want to see what this guy does. I think he's going to have a very solid 2025. Moving on, we have MIBR, and this one should come as zero surprise when I say Ospos. There's definitely a lot of discussion around Ospos and a lot of detractors of him saying that he's a baiter, that he's not as good as everybody says he is. But I don't see how you look at Ospos and not see one of the best players to ever play the game. This man is an incredible talent that has been consistent throughout his entire career. He has not only won champions, he has been in the top 4 3 champions in a row. His team always makes it to those last 4 teams at champions. That is an impressive feat, and he's one of the only players, if not the only player, to be able to do that. Yes, he's not as aggressive as other duelists such as Jagamo or Zekin, but Ospos is very intelligent. He's a very smart player. He sees the game incredibly well. If you look at his stats, I think why some people call him a baiter is because his KD ratio is insane. He had like a 1.35 last year. Like, this man never dies. But I don't think that's because he's baiting his teammates. He just chooses his spots incredibly well. He can absolutely play that aggressive style. It's just not the one that he chooses to succeed, and I think that's fine. He is an amazing player. I think this MIBR roster looks very dangerous for this year. They are definitely my pick for best Brazilian team, despite losing to Furia in an offseason event. I'm not going to take too much from that, but Ospos doesn't accept failure. This man does not want to lose. He is a very competitive player, and you can just tell because he's not a player that like tries to like build his own brand a lot, and like I know he streams, but it's not like he's like a Zelsis or players that really try to like build up a personal brand. I think he just wants to win. He just really likes Valorant. He's just a competitive guy, and this is what he's really good at. And I kind of love that, honestly. It's kind of nice to see a player in esports do that instead of like try to be a content creator and use the VCT to just become one later. Tens? Nah, I'm kidding. I love tens. Anyways, really like Ospos. I really like this MIBR roster. I think they're going to be a pretty solid team. Last but not least, we have Sentinels. Now, Sentinels, I think, are in a pretty interesting spot. After their performance at Soup League, again, I don't want to take too much from off-season events, but I will say that I am kind of worried now. I still think this team is very good. They have a lot of really good talent, but I heard a lot of people saying that this roster might be better than last year's roster, even because now they have Bang, who, yeah, he's not as good as Tens, but he's a more traditional smokes player. And with Nere coming in, maybe they replace Tens' talent there, just in a different role. And while I see the logic in that argument, I find it kind of baffling because how do you lose a player like Tens and then say that you're going to be a better team because you have a guy that plays more traditionally? Because Tens was not only valuable because he was so good individually, but also he really helped the player that I think is the best player on Sentinels, and that is Zekin. Zekin is an incredible talent. I think at the end of the Madrid tournament, that was him kind of claiming the best player in the world tag. Unfortunately, Sen fell off mid-season, so I think he lost that, and I think he definitely wants to try to reclaim that. But I am kind of worried that he's not going to, because he doesn't have TenZ setting him up anymore. TenZ was very good as a playmaker for this team. TenZ and Zekin, just as a combo, just had incredible chemistry. When Sentinels were playing really well, it was Zekin and TenZ leading the charge, just playing incredibly well together. And now Zekin doesn't have that. And what Sentinels have been doing in the offseason is they've been putting Narrate on Sentinel, and then putting John QT on Info Initiator, and I don't know, it hasn't really worked too well so far. And when they did it at Sin City Classic, I was like, oh, well, they're just trying out stuff, and maybe they don't keep doing this. But now they've done it at Super League too, so I really don't know. And, you know, I trust Kaplan as a coach, but is that really what you should be doing? Because I really think Narrate should be on Initiator. Maybe they just think John QT is better for the Info Initiator role, but still just not seeing Narrate on the role that he was so successful on last year. Definitely a bit worrying, but Zekin should still be the main Duelist player. Maybe they flex a bit and try Narrate on Duelist, because he can play that as well. If Sentinels are going to replicate what they did last year, or get close to what they did, or be a more consistent team, Zekin is going to be the main driver of it. As I said, he's an incredible talent, but without TenZ, will he be able to replicate his performance last year? I think he's absolutely capable of it, but I'm very curious to see how this goes for him. I think this is the year where Zekin can truly prove that he's the best player in the world, because if he doesn't have TenZ backing him up, and what was replaced in place of TenZ, that ends up being not as good as TenZ, which that's kind of an unfair bar to put, because TenZ was so good. And Bank and Narrate, I do have a lot of confidence in. I'm just worried about the roles right now. But overall, Zekin, he's a really good player. I really think that he's going to have a breakout season this year and bring Sentinels to glory without TenZ in the new era of this team. So those are all 12 players that I have to talk about. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think of my selections. Please let me know your own picks, and please click like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.